surface, Sylvian surface, right? So we have frontal lobe, parietal lobe, somatosensory area, which has which consists Brodmann area 1, 2, 3, right? Primary motor area, which is equivalent to Brodmann area 4. Premotor and supplementary motor area, right? Brodmann area 6. Remember this? So, here we have a region for thinking. We have several sub-regions in the premotor cortex. One is for speech, Broca's area. Another one is for eye movements, voluntary eye movements. Another region for head rotation and neck rotation. And here we have actually another region for hand skills, okay? So hand skills also is represented here, another area for speech, bilateral region, contralateral region, right? So for each area of the cortex, we can consider some words, some functions, right? So we know that cortex has several types of connections. Input to the cortex comes from other cortical regions, from hippocampus, amygdala, thalamus, brainstem modulatory system. We talked about this yesterday. I told you that amygdala is part of the limbic system. Limbic system has a cortical area and some subcortical area, and these areas are interconnected. So, one connection of cortex is from amygdala. And I also talked about this one today. I told you that in the brainstem we have a modulatory system, a brain activating system, which consists several types of neurons, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, serotonin, histamine, and so on. So they send neurons to the cortex. So in order to keep the cortex awake, right? We also talked about this before. You know that there are several nuclei in the thalamus. Some of them are specific nuclei, others are non-specific, right? Specific nuclei send some neurons specifically to some regions of the cortex. For example, VPN, ventral posterior nucleus, sends axons to somatosensory area, right? Lateral geniculate body sends neuron to occipital cortex. So each specific nuclei of the thalamus sends specific projections to some areas of the cortex. So, and non-specific neurons go diffused into the cortex. Output of cortex include, again, other cortical regions, hippocampal formation. So hippocampus sends neurons to the cortex and receives neurons, right? Amygdala also sends neurons to cortex and receives neuron from the cortex. Thalamus also. And we talked about this yesterday. Caudate and putamen, striatum. They also receive glutamatergic and acetylcholinergic neurons from the cortex. Right? Brainstem and spinal cord also are under the control of the cortex. So we know that, for example, we have corticospinal tract. So from cortex to the spinal cord. So these are connections of cortex, right? So each area of the cortex has specific connections with parts. So somatic area is connected with the ventral posterior lateral, ventral posterior medial. A primary motor cortex is connected to the ventral lateral, ventral anterior nuclei. Right? Remember from yesterday? I told you that, like, neurons from the cerebellum. From the lateral region of the cell. Go to the dentate nucleus. From dentate nucleus, they go to thalamus. From thalamus, they go to cortex. Some of these fibers go to primary motor neurons. Others go to supplementary and premotor cortex, right? So, primary motor and premotor cortex receives fibers from thalamus. Which nucleus? Lateral nucleus or anterior nucleus. Ventrolateral, ventral anterior. Prefrontal cortex has two-way connections with dorsomedial nucleus of the thalamus. So each region is connected bilaterally with the thalamus. So thalamus is very important because it functions at the same time that cortex functions, right? So these connections actually support function of the cortex. So this figure shows different layers of the cortex. We talked about this before, you know, that there are 6 layers. Layer 1 contains actually dendrites and axons that travel from each area of the cortex to the next one. Layer 2 and 3 have small pyramidal cells. Layer 4 has granular cells and receives inputs from thalamus. So we have thalamocortical inputs in this layer. Layer 5 has large pyramidal cells, so it's the main output of the cortex. Layer 6 is called polymorphic layer. So we have neurons with several types, with different morphologies. So it is also a start of some tracks that move to smaller regions in the brain, like to the thalamus. So corticothalamic fibers start from here, right? So you have seen connections, layers, right? So another important thing about the cortex is the level of information process, right? So for somatic sensation, you know that we have a primary somatic area, which is composed of Brodmann area 1, 2, and 3. We have a secondary somatic area, remember? Brodmann area 41, 43, right? And a somatic association of it. Brodmann area 5 and 7, right? So this is for somatic sensation. We have primary and secondary areas. For visual cortex also we have the same. So we have a primary visual area, secondary visual area, and association areas. For hearing, we have primary auditory, secondary auditory areas, and also association areas. For movement also, we have primary motor and premotor and supplementary motor. Premotor and supplementary motor areas are secondary areas of the motor system, right? So for every sensation or movement, we have primary areas, secondary areas, and association areas. Let's get back to the somatic sensation. You remember that in the somatosensory area 1, the basic elements of touch is detected. Like what? Which elements are detected in the somatosensory area 1? Pressure, vibration,
against the skin.
Yeah, movement against the skin, sharp pain, right? Goes to cortex, right? Temperature. So these are basic elements. Weight. Then they combine together in Brodmann area 5 and 7. In the Brodmann area 5 and 7, this information, this pre-processed information combined together and are processed at a higher level, so we can say the name of the object which is being held in our hand, right? So we can touch it and say the name. So we can recognize the object. So the highest level of processing happens in Brodmann in association area, Brodmann area 5 and 7. So this is for somatic sensation. The same also happens for visual system. So the primary visual area can detect lines and dots. in the figure, in the visual scene, right? Then, in the secondary area, we can detect color, the intensity of the light, and directions of the line and angles. So this is higher level processing related to that. But in the associational area of the visual system, we can recognize objects. So we can recognize objects, people, places. I can see this, I can recognize this. Okay, it's a pen. Okay? Before this stage, I can see only dots and lines. In the secondary area, I can, and you can detect direction of the lines, angles, patterns, right? Then you can combine this information in the brain and say the name, the final name of this object. So this happens in the association level. So let's summarize. We have primary areas, secondary areas, association areas. In the primary areas, processing is started. So we can detect basic elements. Then the information goes to secondary area. In the secondary area, information processing goes to the next stage, goes to the higher level. Okay, some of higher features are detected. Then they go to the associational area. In the associational area, we can reach the highest level of recognition for that modality of sensation. Vision, audition, auditory, or touch, or anything else. Right? So at the highest level, we have association. Another thing is that associational areas can be unimodal or multimodal. In unimodal associational area, processing only happens in one modality. Like in touch, somatic sensation. Like for vision, or hearing, or motor. But in multimodal associational areas, different sensations are integrated. So they combine together. So in these regions, for example, information processing happens for several sensations. So let's see here. We have a multimodal association area here. We call this parieto-occipitotemporal association area. Another one is here, limbic association. So this is part of the cortical ring or limbic lobe. We have seen this yesterday. Right? Here we have prefrontal association. So 3 different associational areas of these, this, and this. Right? So this is a multimodal association area. You can see it's located between the occipital cortex, which is related to visual sensation, located in the parietal cortex, which is related to somatic sensation, and it's also part of the temporal lobe, which is related to hearing and vision. Right? So here we have combination of sensations. Right? Combination of sensation means we can integrate different type of modalities. For example, you hold this one in your hand, you can touch it, feel it, so you know the weight, you know the shape, the form. At the same time, you can see that, right? And maybe you're listening to music, or it's ringing, and you can hear it also. So, several sensations are happening at the same time. Touch, hearing, vision. And they combine together. But in your brain, you have only one unified sensation from this object. This is your cell phone. This is something unique. Right? So sensations, different type of sensations are combined together here in the parieto-occipitotemporal cortex. So you have a single understanding of this object. Right? So this is the function of multimodal association areas. So it's a higher function of the brain. So let's see the functions here. In the parieto-occipital-temporal cortex, we have spatial coordinates of body and surrounding. What else? We have a region called Wernicke's area, which is important for comprehension of language and also for intelligence. We have an area for naming of objects in the temporal lobe. Another region for behavior, emotion, and motivation. Planning complex movements. Elaboration of thoughts. So, are these sensory functions or motor functions when we talk about like spatial coordinates? So, spatial coordinates means I have an understanding of the space. I know this is in front of me, back, right, left. You're sitting, you're far or close. Are you on the right of this guy or on the left side? So these are spatial relations. So we have an understanding of this space, right? Spatial relations. So it's not a pure sensory action, right? It's something higher than sensation. It can, at the same time, can be used for motor movement. For example, I can throw something for you. Okay? So you can be at the target of a motor action. Right? So we call this type of functions higher functions. Integrative functions. Remember from first session I told you that in the brain we have sensory system, motor system, association.
Higher order.
Higher order. Right? So we're going to talk about this today. One area is a parieto-occipital-temporal cortex. I told you that it's responsible for spatial understanding, spatial coordinates of body and surrounding. So if there is damage here, in the dorsal part, problems can include impairment of body awareness, motor control, and visual guidance of motor behavior. What do I mean? Impairment of body awareness. So, posterior parietal cortex. On the right side is damaged. The patient is not aware of the left side of the body. The patient ignores left hand, left leg, and left part of the body. What do I mean? But by ignoring, I mean the patient thinks this part doesn't exist. Okay? He or she forgets to do the works related to this part. For example, they want to shave their face. They do this only on the right side. They ignore left side. They want to make up the face, ignore left side. They want to put on their clothes, they ignore left sleeve. Right? So, there is a problem with body awareness. When it happens, when there is damage in the posterior parietal cortex on the right side. Right? Another problem is motor control. You have ideomotor apraxia. So the patient ignores doing some works related to the left side. So awareness and words are lost on this side. Visual guidance of motor behavior is lost. In clinics, we call this optic ataxia. Optic ataxia. You can see the signs here. You ask the patient to put the hand in this slit. Okay? The patient misses this part. Especially when it's located on the prefrontal side. So, usually the patient can reach objects in the central region. But when they want to reach an object on the prefrontal part, they miss the target. You ask them to put the hand in the slit, and the slit is vertical, but they actually reach like this, or like this. If you ask them if it's vertical or horizontal, they told you that it's vertical. But when they want to reach for that, they go this way. Okay? So what's the problem here physiologically? The problem is that there is a problem with the brain that cannot guide behavior based on sensory information. So sensory information tells us this slate is vertical, and this should guide behavior in the same way, but it cannot guide behavior. It cannot guide hand movements, right? So we have misdirection, misorientation. Another problem is inaccurate pre-shaping. So you want to reach for this, okay, for the patient. So when I reach for this, my shaping of hand corresponds to the shape of the object, like this. If I want to reach for this, my hand shape is different. If I want to reach for this, then it's different. Right? So from the start of movement to the end of the movement, the shape of the hand changes corresponding to the shape of the object. We call this pre-shaping. It happens normally. But in this patient with posterior parietal cortex damage, you can see that there is no pre-shaping. So the hand doesn't shape related to the shape of the object. Right? So, misdirection, misorientation, and impaired pre-shaping are collectively called optic ataxia, which is one sign of damage to the dorsomedial part of the parietal on the right. If the damage is in the ventral side, then symptoms are different. Instead of having motor problem, the patient has cognitive problem. Okay? The patient cannot perceive or think about the spatial relations. For example, you may ask the patient to cross these lines. They only do this for this point. They ignore this left side. Okay? So where's the problem? In the cortex, posterior parietal part, which is a multimodal area on the right side. But in the ventral region, not dorsal region. Right? You ask them to divide this line into two equal sides. They did it from here. So the patient ignores this part, left side of the line. You ask them to copy this one, the patient only did right. You ask them to draw a clock based on their memory, not copying. Right? So they did a circle and put all of the numbers on the right side. Ignore left side.
But the patient, when they look at, for example, the picture of the house, they see the whole thing. They see both sides.
Yeah. If you test the visual acuity, there is no problem with the eyes, with vision. The patient only ignores the left side. Ignores means doesn't pay attention to that side.
Forgets it's there?
Yeah. So it forgets. So, what is the attention? So, you are paying attention to me, so listen to me, so you ignore the sound of this fan. You can hear it if you want. Can you hear? Okay. It's always there, but you never paid attention to that. Right? If you want, you can pay attention to that. But you normally don't do that. Because you are paying attention to me. Right? It doesn't mean that you cannot hear that. You only ignore that. Your brain do that. Okay? So the same also happens here, but unwantedly and subconsciously. The patient doesn't decide about this. This happens, okay, because of the disease. So the patient ignores this part. So let's summarize this slide. The patient can see everything, but doesn't pay attention to the left side. Okay? So there is a problem with attention. What is the injury? Posterior parietal cortex on the right side in the ventral part. Right? So, if you compare this one with this one, we can see that when there is damage on the dorsal part, the problems are mainly motor, related to movement, and also body awareness, right? But when the problem is ventral, the injury is ventral, then cognitive aspect of the space is lost. So, parietal cortex is important for space, for spatial understanding, and using this spatial understanding for guiding movement. If there is damage here, the patient cannot use space correctly. Right? The patient is not aware of the left side of the body, left side of environment, left side of objects. Okay? So you may ask the patient to tell the name of this shape. Or this letter. So you have, for example, this letter and this letter. Okay? The patient looks at this one and says it's O. What about this? It's E. You ask the patient to cross the dots. Okay? So then he or she will do this. So the patient can see the whole image. When they want to tell you the name, it uses the whole image. But when they focus changes to dots, to details, then he ignores the left side. So do this. Ignore this part.
The patient forgets about the other side.
Yes.
If after this you tell the patient, what about this other side? Will they remember to do it then, and they do it?
So you should guide them. Okay? So when normally they look at this, they see letter O, general. Okay? But if you ask them to focus on the dots, they forget this side. So you can ask them and you can guide them toward this side. Okay, they will focus on this, but they ignore this part. Okay? Whenever the frame of focus changes, they ignore left.
Doctor, is that related to the right of the left inferior parietal lobe is injured?
Yeah, when inferior parietal.
The inferior parietal lobe.
Yeah, inferior parietal lobe. Yeah.
Okay, so the right, the patient going to ignore the left
Yes.
one?
Yeah. If there is damage on the right side, the patient ignores left side. But you may ask me about the reverse state.
Yeah.
If there is damage on the left side, does the patient ignore right side? No. Okay, so let's see. So, you ask the patient to attend to the left visual field. Attend to the left. At the same time, you do brain imaging. You can see the functional state of the brain. You can see that in the parietal cortex, on the right side, there is hyperactivity. So it's natural. But then you ask the patient to attend to the right. So we expect hyperactivity on the left side. But you can see that hyperactivity mainly happens on the right side again. And there is a little activity on the left side. Right? So we can model this for attention. Normally, we attend to the left by right brain. And we attend to the right, again by right brain, and minimally by left brain. So if there is damage on the right side, what happens? We can attend to the left, to the right, but we cannot attend to
Left.
the left. What happens if there is damage on the opposite side? Then the right brain can attend to
Left side.
left and
Right side.
so here we have minimal right neglect, minimal right neglect. But here we have severe left neglect. So for attention, the right side of the brain more important. In the posterior parietal cortex, right, which is a region between visual cortex, somatic cortex, auditory cortex. Right? So, what about other areas? Prefrontal area. So, this region of the brain is important for selection, planning, and execution of appropriate behavior, especially in terms of social behavior. So, we usually put some inhibition on our behavior, right? We don't do anything we want. We inhibit ourselves. This is the function of prefrontal cortex. So we select behavior and we inhibit unwanted or inappropriate behavior. So we call this moral properties, okay? Moral function. So we can say that prefrontal cortex is important for actually calling forth information from widespread areas of the brain. So, we save a lot of memories in our brain. We save visual memories in the occipital and temporal lobe. We save memory of words in the temporal lobe. We save memory of motor actions in the frontal lobe. Right? We know actually people by the action of the temporal lobe. But when we think, we use prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex has access to all of these regions. So it can actually call forth information from different regions. So it's located higher in the brain. I mean, in a hierarchy of the brain, prefrontal cortex is located at the top, at the highest level. So it can bring information from other regions, right? So when we think about, for example, yesterday, so we have the memories in the temporal lobe, but thinking process is happening here in the prefrontal cortex. So prefrontal cortex brings the information about yesterday, from the temporal lobe to the prefrontal cortex. When the information comes here, it should be stored for a short time, because we are handling the information, we are thinking about that, right? So this is stored in working memory. So prefrontal region has a space for short storage of memory. We call this working memory. Working memory is different from short-term memory because this type of memory is being used. For example, you may actually ask your friend about number of your friend, okay? They'll tell you the number, but you don't have anything to write, okay? I mean, your pen and paper is in your room. So you memorize the number for some seconds, right? So you ask them, you hear them, then you can circulate the information in your brain. So you rehearse it, you repeat it with yourself. Okay? So we call this working memory. So information comes to your brain, then it's on for some seconds, you use it, okay? Then, after some seconds, you write it. After that, you forget it.
It's
Right? Yeah, you forget it. So, you only keep it in your mind for some seconds. So, based on this, we can say that working memory is for storing small pieces of information for a very short time, for an immediate goal. Okay? This information may come from outside the brain, or it may be activated by your memory, past memory. Okay? So you think about that. After that, another piece of information comes to your brain, comes to the prefrontal cortex. So the previous one is lost.
So, for example, we are studying something.
Yeah.
How do we know like it's going in our working memory or?
So working memory. So when you study something, for example, you are studying science. Okay? So you remember something from the past. Okay? But your reading process is going on. When you read the next piece of information, the previous one goes actually away from your working memory, and you are focusing on new thing. Okay? Again, so you think about that, you match it with your previous information, then it goes off, another part of information comes to your working memory. So this is the process of thinking, right? So you go through a stream of thinking, right? So every time you bring a new piece of information into your working memory, you handle it, you put it away, right? So you are using your working memory for thinking process. So this way you can elaborate the thought. You can deepen the thinking process. Right? So, and the same process is also used for planning. For example, you want to prepare tea, okay? So suddenly, and at the subconscious level, you know the process. You should boil the water. Before that, you should prepare fire. Okay. You need some glasses, maybe you need tea. Okay, and you know the order of making tea and the order of this process. How this is done in your brain? Actually, this is the work of your prefrontal cortex. So, prefrontal cortex at the subconscious level divide this process into several stages, and you go through these stages in order to reach a goal. The same also happens for actually complex goals. Okay? For example, you want to pass your Uruguay exam, and you have Uruguay exam 2 years later, maybe. So from now, you are preparing for that. So you think about that. You put it into several stages. So you know that in order to take the exam, you should pass neuroscience, right? So this is complex goal actually. So this happens in the prefrontal cortex. So another thing is prognostication. So you look at the sky, you see it slowly, and you predict that it may rain. So you predict, okay? But maybe you think that no, it's hot, maybe it's not raining, okay? So you are predicting the future. All of these are happening in the prefrontal cortex. So prefrontal cortex can bring information from different areas of the brain. This information comes into the working memory. In the working memory, it is processed, it is handled. Right? Based on this, you can deepen your thought. You can elaborate thinking, right? You can plan and you can predict. So this is the function of the prefrontal cortex. So generally, we can say that selection, planning, and execution of appropriate thinking. Damage here may cause impaired restraint. So the person is not able to inhibit some of the inappropriate behaviors. So they do everything they want. Okay? Even if it's not appropriate for that social context. Disordered thought. Why? Because thinking depends on the prefrontal cortex. Perseveration. I mean, having negative thoughts repeatedly. Okay? Inability to plan appropriate action. So the brain cannot divide actually a general goal into several steps and go through the steps to reach the goal. Okay? This happens when there is damage in the prefrontal cortex. Usually damage here doesn't cause any paralysis. If you test, for example, IQ, the patient may show its normal IQ. Okay? So they know everything about the relations, the rules, I don't know, the laws. But they usually don't use them. So they ignore everything. So they do anything they want. So personality changes after damage to the prefrontal cortex.
So, when a person cannot choose between two things, is that also related to this part? For example, I give a person...
So sometimes it's normal. So
I mean, it's a repetitive thing. For example, I give someone a juice and water.
So we can say that...
And that keeps on going like that.
Yeah, problem with decision making.
Yeah. So that's also from here.
This is part of the function of this part. Okay, maybe there is... Yeah, actually there may not be a structural damage in the brain.
No, not structural, of course, but developmental.
Maybe the function is not as well as other. Okay? So, another region related to higher functions is the medioventral part of the temporal cortex. Medioventral part. So, you ask the patient to draw this, to copy these. This is the patient's copy, and it's perfect. Right? So, compare this one with the other patients that have problem in the parietal cortex. I told you that the patient ignores left side. Right? But here, that problem doesn't exist. But when you ask the patient, what is this that you have drawn, the patient doesn't know that. So there is no description, there is no conscious recognition of objects. So we can say that this area of the brain is important for object recognition. If there is damage here, the condition is called visual object agnosia. Visual object agnosia means the person is not able to recognize objects consciously. Okay? This is not a problem with language. It's related to recognition. For example, this is a key, right? You ask the patient, what is it? So this is the key. I'm enjoying it. Is it the key? It's similar to a key. Okay, so it's better to use this. I'm making it better. Okay? Okay, it's a key, right? So you ask the patient the name, they don't know. But you ask an MCQ question. Okay? You ask them which one is related to this one. Okay? So this is a pen, right? Or pencil. This is a, for example, okay, and
I think I have
this one
this.
is Okay? You ask the patient, what is it? They don't know. You ask them if you can relate this to one of these. They cannot do this because they also cannot recognize this one, and this one. So they cannot recognize any relation. Okay? So this is on the basis of vision. But if you put a key in their hand, they'll tell you the name of the object. They'll tell you that it's a key. Okay? So, based on touch, they can recognize the object. Based on hearing, if you pull it down, and the hearing, they may predict the name, okay? Based on vision, they cannot do that. So that's what we call this visual object. Why? Because this region is important for visual recognition, right? This is higher order functional, right? So another problem. In this area of the inferior side, in the parietal cortex, mainly on the right side is this, okay? We have a region for recognition of faces. So we know each other based on face, right? And you can see that the related area of the brain is a very large area because this is a very important ability of us. So we need it for everyday life. So the region related to that is a very large area, right? So information processing starts in the occipital cortex, goes forward through the temporal lobe. When it reaches in the inferior side, the final stage, we can recognize people, right? So if there is damage here, it causes a condition called prosopagnosia. Prosopagnosia is a problem that the patient is not able to recognize other people based on their face. Even if this person is his father, his mother, his close friend. Okay? So based on the face, they cannot recognize people. But they can recognize people by their appearance. I mean, the way they actually wear clothes, the way they walk, based on their sound, their voice. Okay? So this way they can recognize people. But if you show only face of other people, they cannot recognize. And it may cause some problems and troubles when these people go to parties or ceremonies. I mean, events that people usually change their dress. They may have a special makeup maybe, or they change their appearance. Okay, so they cannot recognize any people. And this is something embarrassing for them. Okay, they don't know how to respond to other people. For example, you say hello to them, and they don't know if to say a warm hello or a very official hello, for example. Right? So, and this is embarrassing for them, they cannot recognize people based on face. So, brain imaging show that inferior temporal cortex on the right side is activated when we recognize faces. So this confirms the conclusions, the results from neurological problems, right? So another region. So let me continue with this one, and then we'll have a break. Okay? It's Wernicke's area. After that, we'll have a break. So another region is the Wernicke's area. It's located in the posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus. Temporal cortex has 3 gyrus: superior, medial, inferior. Right? So in the superior temporal gyrus, posterior part, we have Wernicke's area. So you can see flow of information. information is coming from visual cortex, auditory cortex, some of the sensory cortex, right? But this information was pre-processed before. So information processing for vision happens here, 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 all the way from here to here. So highly processed visual information enters this region. Highly processed auditory information, which is here. Highly processed tactile information, which is here. So it receives actually pre-processed information. So we can say that information processing here happens at the highest level so far. Right? So it's related to something more important than others, other regions. Right? What happens if we stimulate here? Stimulation here may cause some type of hallucination. Seeing something, hearing something that is not real, right? So the person may think or may remember something from childhood. A visual scene from childhood. So you have seen a place in your childhood, maybe 20 years ago. Okay? When you stimulate this area, you can remember that. Or stimulate this area, you can remember a very specific piece of music from a specific singer, maybe. Right? Or a statement by a specific person. So we can say that stimulation of this area can bring information from remote past. What else? If there is damage to the Wernicke's area, then there will be lots of intellectual functions associated with language. The person is not able to understand the meaning of words, inability to read, inability to perform mathematical operations, and also inability to think about logical problems. So generally we can say that this is a region related to language and intelligence. Higher function. Right? So let's talk about language. Language is an ability to associate arbitrary symbols with specific meanings. Why? To express thoughts and emotion. So, what do I mean? So, what do we call this? Marker, right? So, marker. When I say marker, I'm using sound. Sound is a mechanical energy. It has a specific pattern of frequencies. So I'm using a sound with a specific frequency and intensities. Okay? So this is a symbol. Symbol for what? For a meaning. The meaning is this one. Right? I say water. This is another sound with another pattern of frequency and intensity, which means another thing. So, I'm using a symbol to refer to a meaning. This relation is called language. Right? So, we can use several thousands of sound patterns for several thousands of meanings and concepts. And we can combine them together and say and talk about our ideas, our thinking, our emotions. We can make poems, right? We can talk about past, we can talk about future. So this is language. So it's not only communication. Communication may happen also in lower animals. Okay? But we can talk about future. We can talk about an imaginary state. Right? So this is language. So, associating symbols with meaning. So these symbols can be spoken and heard, like the examples I gave you, can be written and read. So instead of talking about something, I can use a visual symbol like this. You can see that and you understand the meaning. So language can be written and read, or gestured and seen. I show you. So you can understand that I'm talking about, or I'm showing you a pen or something related to writing, right? So this is another type of relation, gestured and seen. So this is the meaning. Every language has lexicon, means vocabulary, has some rules, syntax, prosody. Rules means grammar, syntax means the order of words, prosody means emotional coloring, intonation. So you can say something with fear, you can say the same thing with happiness. So meaning is changed. Right? So, prosody, intonation. So, aspects of language. Receptive, expressive. So, you are listening, so you are using this aspect. I'm talking, so I'm generating. Right? So, I'm using this aspect. So, sensory, motor, input, output, other words. So, most of what we know about language actually depends on the works of Broca and Wernicke. Broca found a region in the frontal cortex. Wernicke found another region in the temporal. Actually, they followed some patients that had stroke or head injury. After the stroke or head injury, the patient couldn't talk, couldn't speak very well, especially Broca. Okay? So they followed this patient, and after their death, he actually removed their brain and did some histological experiments on their brain and found that in all of these patients there was damage in the frontal lobe on the left side, centered on this part of the brain, lower part of the frontal. So he called this area region for speaking, right? And he actually maintained and said that we speak with our left brain, because in all of those patients the damage was on the left side, right? So after Broca, Wernicke continued his works, but in other ways. He found that some people cannot speak, but they can understand it. Other people, other patients can speak fluently, but they can't understand it. Okay, so they are different. So the second category was actually followed, and he found that in these people, problem is not here, but it's here, in the temporal lobe. Right? So after that, other scientists continued their work and provided a model for speaking. So we call this Wernicke-Geschwing model. Okay? How it works, for example, when you listen something and then repeat it. So I tell you marker, you repeat marker. Right? So, which part of the brain is activated? You hear the word, so primary auditory cortex starts processing. It receives information, it starts processing. The result goes to Wernicke's area. So you heard marker, you understand the meaning. Okay? So Wernicke's area understands the meaning. Then it sends information to the Broca's area. Why? Because we want to repeat it. We want to generate it again. Right? So information goes through arcuate fasciculus to the Broca's area. Broca's area makes a pattern, a movement pattern, and this movement goes to the motor cortex, the region related to tongue, lips, face, throat, and also respiratory muscles. So we can say the word. So the pattern, the motor pattern is made here. The motor pattern is executed here. So this is the sequence of information processing that happens when we hear a word and repeat it. What about a word that is written and we can read it? Okay? When we read something and repeat it, another pathway is activated. Everything starts from the primary visual word. So we can see the word, information goes to an intermediary region called angular joint. It's located in the parietal lobe. So from here they go to the Wernicke's area. Again, in the Wernicke's area we understand the meaning, and the rest of the circuit is similar to that. Right? So we can read a word and then repeat it. All of these are located on the left side of the brain. Okay, so now, if there is damage to the Broca's area, what happens?
The patient cannot speak.
Cannot speak. Good. What about damage to the Wernicke's area?
We cannot understand.
They cannot understand, but they can speak fluent. Right? So we call this condition aphasia. So aphasia happens after damage to specific brain regions that actually diminish ability to comprehend or produce language. Comprehension in the Wernicke's area, production in the Broca's area. But there is no problem with vision, no problem with hearing, no problem with movement of the lips, movement of the face, movement of the tongue. So it doesn't mean that the patient is paralyzed in the face. Okay? So the lips can move. Okay? They can move their tongue. But when they want to talk, they cannot use these muscles appropriately to talk about the idea, the concept. Okay? So the nature of the problem is something cognitive, not something sensory or motor. Right? So we call this aphasia. It's different from dysarthria. We had this before, yesterday's session, remember? When there is damage to the cerebellum, the patient cannot talk. But this problem is something motor, because the cerebellum can coordinate motor movement. When the cerebellum is missing or is lost, then the patient cannot coordinate movements of the tongue, lips, and face to talk fluently. We call this dysarthria. The patient knows what they want to say. The patient can understand you, can communicate to you with gestures, maybe, but they cannot talk fluently. So we call this dysarthria. So dysarthria is different from aphasia. Aphasia is something related to cognition, right? So let's compare Broca's aphasia and Wernicke's aphasia. In Broca's aphasia, speaking is not fluent. There are pauses between words and sentences, right? The person may tend to repeat some words. So they want to say something, it's very difficult for them, they make a lot of efforts. Sometimes they need to repeat the words. They want to say marker, they say ma. So they try to say the word, so they repeat it. Okay? Because speaking is not fluent. Broca's area is related to language production, especially the motor pattern. When there is damage here, speaking is not fluent. Syntax is disordered. So the order of words are disordered. Grammar is disordered. Structure of individual words sometimes is disordered. But comprehension is intact. When you talk to them, they understand you. Okay? Because Wernicke's area is intact, so they can understand you. You can understand them. Actually, it's difficult. They talk difficultly. I mean, with some problem, okay? But you can somehow understand them. So we call this Broca's aphasia. What about Wernicke's aphasia? Wernicke's injured, but Broca's intact. Right? Broca's intact, so it can generate words. It speaks, he or she speaks fluently. But there is no content, there is no meaning. So, there is a small spontaneous repetition, syntax is okay, grammar is okay.
Useless words.
Yeah, comprehension is not okay.
They don't understand what they're speaking.
So, you can see some examples here. This is the Broca's aphasia speech. So, you can see that there are some pauses between words, and actually word generation is very difficult, right? So these black words actually were made by the patient. So you can read this, and actually the physician could understand him by some help, okay? So he could help the patient. This way, they could guide the communication, the talking, and the speech. Okay, so this is Broca's aphasia, but this one is an example of Wernicke's aphasia. So you can see a paragraph here made in less than 1 minute, okay, by the patient. So you can see that there is perfect grammar here. I'm awful nervous, you know. Once in a while, I get caught up, so syntax is okay, grammar is okay, the patient is fluent. But if you read the whole thing, there is nothing here. You cannot understand anything.
It's like Joe Biden.
You ask them why you came to hospital, they answered this. Okay? So, comprehension is lost. So we want to use this to think about the physiology, right? Broca's area is a place in the brain responsible for making words, sentences, speaking, language, so production of language. For production, we need an idea. So idea comes from prefrontal cortex, right? Prefrontal cortex decides about what they want to say, and words are stored in the temporal cortex. Words and their meaning is stored in temporal cortex. So prefrontal cortex uses information that was saved in the temporal cortex. Then this information goes into the Wernicke's area. So Wernicke's area brings the information and makes the concept, and this concept goes to the Broca's area. Then Broca's area can produce the motor pattern to say those words, to say those sentences. Okay? So Broca's area is mainly important for motor aspect of the language, but Wernicke's area is mainly important for comprehensive or cognitive aspect of the language, making the content. When there is a loss of Wernicke's area, the content is missing. Right? So there are other aphasias. The other one is alexia. Do you remember I told you that if you read a word and repeat it, you need a region called angular gyrus. Remember? Here, angular gyrus. It's located between the visual cortex and brain. If there is damage here, what happens? Wernicke is intact, Broca's intact, right? This part is not intact. The patient can see the words, but information cannot reach Broca's areas. It cannot reach Wernicke's areas. The patient is not able to read anything. So you give them something to read, so we call this alexia, inability to read. They have also trouble understanding pictures. Right? So angular gyrus is part of the parietal cortex. Frontal cortex, I told you, is related to spatial understanding. So this patient usually shows some problem in spatial understanding. For example, one feature is finger agnosia. So you ask them to close their eyes, and you touch one of their fingers, for example this one. You ask them to tell you which finger is being touched. The patient is not able to tell you which finger on which side. Okay, or they are confused with this. Or they may have right-left confusion. You ask them to put their right hand on their left ear, they get confused. They don't know what to do. Okay? Right-left confusion. Another feature is acalculia. So they cannot do mathematical operations. Another one is agraphia. They cannot write. So these are some other problems that happen when there is damage in the angular brain. So the main one is alexia. But associated problems are finger agnosia, acalculia, agraphia, left-right confusion. If the damage is widespread and involves both Broca's area and Wernicke's area, then the condition is called global aphasia. The person cannot talk, cannot understand, cannot repeat. Okay? Global aphasia. The same also happens for. So let me talk about this after the break. Okay? Is it better?
Yeah.